You are invited to join me for a live recording of Neurodivergent Faith. It's going to be an open conversation called Gratitude in All Circumstances. And this will be on Wednesday, November 12th, 2025 at 8 p.m. Eastern US time on Zoom. Video is optional, participation is optional. You're welcome to come however you like, to engage or simply to observe. And we're going to focus on 1 Thessalonians 5:18, where we're encouraged to give thanks in all circumstances. Not necessarily for every circumstance. Some are deeply difficult, but in them. So during this live episode, you'll have a chance to practice that kind of honest gratitude together. You'll be invited to share through chat or through video 2 simple reflections. 1, something you're finding challenging right now as a neurodivergent follower of Jesus. Number 2, something you're genuinely grateful for. And together we'll make space for it all and bear witness to one another in our neurodivergent faith. So again, that is Wednesday, November 12th, 2025 at 8 p.m. Eastern US time on Zoom. If you're interested, email me at the email address in the show notes and I'll send you the Zoom link. I'm kind of excited about it. I'm curious who will show up. Welcome to Neurodivergent Faith, a podcast to help you navigate the beautiful and complicated intersection of neurodivergence and Christian faith and practice. Whether you're neurodivergent yourself or you're a friend, family member, or church leader seeking to understand more about the neurodivergent Christian experience, you're in the right place. My name's Josh Davis. I'm autistic, ADHD, a spiritual director, and an ordained pastor. And I'm delighted to have you join me as we explore the unique ways neurodivergent people experience God, worship, community, and scripture, along with special interests, sensory and attention differences, social and communication challenges, and much more. Together, we'll break down barriers, confront misconceptions and assumptions, and celebrate the beautiful diversity of God's creation in all of us. So, if you're ready to think deeply and creatively, to reconcile your faith and your brain wiring, or you just want to hear what it sounds like when neurodivergence and Christianity have a conversation, come on in. It's a bit messy, definitely interesting, and we wouldn't have it any other way. We don't do small talk here, so let's jump into something real, raw, and robust. Are you ready? Take a deep breath. Hold it. And let it out with a sigh. All right, here we go. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to Neurodivergent Faith. We're in the middle of season 3, and I'm really glad that you decided to join us today. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. Today, I'm talking to John Machnee, and he's got a great podcast called Christianity on the Spectrum. And John, I just want to say welcome and would love for you to just share a little bit about yourself as we get going here.
Yeah, so my name is John. I am a computer engineer from Canada. I used to be in the military before I uh, before I left to work in the private sector in cybersecurity. I used to be in the military and worked in what most people would recognize as military intelligence. I was diagnosed with autism when I was 16. Well, more specifically, I was diagnosed with Asperger's when I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
And I was described by the person who diagnosed me as the most typical case of Asperger syndrome that he's ever seen.
Wow.
I always think that's very funny. And yeah, I was raised Mennonite Brethren. For those of you who don't know, Mennonite Brethren it's in the Anabaptist tradition. I mean, the joke is MB stands for mostly Baptist, but uh, so is conservative evangelical. You can tell I wasn't a very good Anabaptist because I joined the army when I was age 18.
Yeah,
Uh,
that doesn't compute for me.
yeah, yeah.
How did your
It
Anabaptist brethren feel about that?
they didn't really express any of their thoughts to me.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I'm from Saskatchewan, and so my family went to that church because it was the closest evangelical church in the area. So I myself wasn't wasn't very bought into the Anabaptist side of things, but I was a very serious evangelical Christian. And then I deconverted from Christianity and left the faith. And I then started finding a lot of other autistic people who had also left the faith in very similar ways to me. And I thought this is kind of weird. Is there a pattern here, or is
Uh-huh.
this just an anomaly in my little microcosm? And I looked at the peer-reviewed research. I did not find the peer-reviewed research to be particularly satisfying in answering the questions that I was interested in. So I thought, this is a very interesting emerging field of research. I'm just going to look into it myself. And so I did. And that kicked off what was supposed to be a very short stint of research, but I just found it so interesting that I've been doing it for about 10 years now. I ended up reconverting to Christianity 5 years ago, I think it is now. And I'm an Anglican now. I go to an Anglo-Catholic church, but I'm not very Anglo-Catholic. I'm a weird mix of Lutheran and Reformed. But go to an Anglo-Catholic church because it is the only church in the area that I can handle.
Hmm.
Uh, and yeah, so my research project at this point encompasses around 26,000 online autistics. It's overwhelmingly ASD1, or what used to be called high functioning autism, Asperger's, or PDD-NOS. And yeah, and so 26,000 of those people. It's far more than 26,000, but 26,000 that I could get really good data on. I've got thousands of survey responses over the years combined, and I have now done over 600 interviews, long form interviews with autistic Christians and ex-Christians to just document their experiences with Christianity and notice any patterns and trends. If you listen to my podcast, you will know that I'm a very data-driven, data and stats guy. That's sort of the angle that I approach almost everything from. And so it's certainly a different tack than you'll get in a lot of the resources that are available for autism in the church. So if you want long, detailed descriptions of the sort of complex data landscape that exists within online autistic communities, that's what I'm interested in. So that's what I focus on.
That's amazing. I read on YouTube on your channel that a lot of your research has been with both Christian and ex-Christian autists,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I see how it's really cool to hear how that connects with your own story and your own journey. And then your curiosity that's like, I wonder if there's a pattern here. Uh, I'm all about pattern recognition and really appreciate your willingness to jump in. Like, there's no data. I'm just gonna go do this research myself.
Yep. Someone's got to do it, and I don't trust anyone else to do it correctly, so I'm just gonna do it myself. That's pretty much how it went.
Yeah.
And yeah, now I thought of writing a book about it, and I tried several times, but then it just wasn't working out for me. I got through like three different drafts of the book, and I just decided a podcast would actually be way easier to convey this information. So I just made a podcast, and when I asked most autistic people, like, how do you consume media about this type of thing, they said they would preferred podcasts. So I thought, all right, simple as, let's do this.
Yeah. So when did you start your podcast?
Almost exactly a year ago. I recorded it. I recorded the first 10 episodes like many times. So it's like the sixth draft of it, where I sort of lay out all of the data and stats that I could think of. And I initially thought I'm only going to do 10 episodes. This is going to be a limited run podcast. But then people just had way more questions than the data that I gave in those first 10 podcasts. And wanted me to talk more about other topics that I had researched, and I thought, well, I have this data at my fingertips. I can answer most of these questions. And so yeah, I've basically been doing a weekly podcast since then and talking about all sorts of things. We've been going into neurodiversity and the politics of neurodiversity and deep dives into dating and relationships in autistic Christians, and basically everything that you could think of. And people just email me being like, "Hey, can you do a episode on this?" And I'll say, "Sure." And I'll put together data if I have data on it, and I think it'll be an interesting topic. So yeah, that's sort of what I do.
Yeah, I love that. In fact, I haven't had the chance to listen to all the episodes yet, but the ones I have listened to, I've really enjoyed and I really appreciate the deep dive and the data. And you're not skimming the surface in any way. And so I would encourage anybody who's out there listening, have a look at Christianity on the Spectrum, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm just scrolling through a couple of the titles of recent episodes. Why are so many autistic inclusive orthodox? Autistic Christians and conspiracy theories, autistic Christians and the pro-life movement, autistic Christians and effective altruism, Black autistic perspectives on disability theology. There's just such variety there. You'll have plenty to explore. So check
Yeah.
it out. And for today, I wanted to center our conversation sort of as an introduction to those who've been listening to this podcast, because you've done so much research and have begun to maybe spot some characteristics and some overlaps in what you've called an autistic Christianity or autistic spirituality. So I'd like to center around that for today. We could go in so many different directions, but that's where I'd like to go. And I want to start off by asking, in all of your research, all your conversations, what particular gifts do you see that autistic people bring into Christian community? I think a lot of times autistic people and autism is framed in a deficit mentality. So I'd like to start with this idea of gifts. What particular gifts do you see?
Yeah, so I will I mean one of the jokes with my podcast that I find really funny that my audience keeps throwing at me is there's a meme with a used car salesman hitting the roof of a car and he's like, this bad boy can fit so many caveats in it. So before I actually answer your question, I just want to emphasize that autism is a very heterogeneous population. It is not uniform at all. And so, like when we're talking about autistic gifts, it could conceivably the answer could be everything, right? Like
Yeah.
there's such a broad range of autistic people that you can find autistic people who will have spiritual gifts in any conceivable area that you can imagine spiritual gifts. But
Mhm.
on the flip side, you'll also have autistic people who don't have any, right? Who really don't have anything that they do bring to the church body in terms of utility. And this is, the I often talk at churches and things like that, and people will emphasize the sort of utility and function and the gifts that autistic people bring. But sometimes we also need to acknowledge that we may not bring anything. And even if we don't bring anything to the church, it is still valuable that you're in the church.
Yeah.
Even if you produce nothing, you bring nothing, you simply by being a human and being part of the congregation, you are doing something for the church. Like if you're looking for broad trends, I mean, the most common thing that autistic people bring to the church is a sense of intellectual rigor and seriousness that you don't always find in the church body. If you ask autistic people what sorts of things they did in terms of spiritual practices in the last 6 months, you will often get, well, I read these books, or I listened to these podcasts, or I studied this topic in depth, or I spent my entire time memorizing the Psalms or something like that. I think that is a fairly valuable thing that autistic people often bring is a level of intellectual engagement and a level of intellectual seriousness that you don't always see with other people. This is of course not unique to autistic people, but it is something that you definitely find among all of us. And one thing that you find in particular with autistic people is a willingness to take things to their most logical conclusion and a
Yes.
willingness to sort of bite the bullet in a way that other people might not be willing to. And
Maybe even state it boldly and bluntly, right?
yeah, and this can be a good thing. It can also be a bad thing, right? Like this doesn't always lead to positive trajectories of things. This can also lead to some deeply negative places as you mentioned one of the topics of the podcast was autistic Christians and conspiracy theories, and you get a lot of that in there. So you get that, but you also get just the way that autistic people engage with the faith. I think also sits as a reminder to other people that Christianity is a universal religion.
Mm.
And when I say it's a universal religion, I mean that it is for everyone. And to be for everyone and to account for neurotypes and variations within neurologies, you need to realize that people are going to do things very differently from you. And so, an example that I give is we talk about this concept especially in the Western church, we talk about having a personal relationship with Jesus.
Right.
Well, 85% of autistic people that I've surveyed say they don't have a personal relationship with Jesus. The concept to them doesn't make sense. They don't know what I'm getting at when I ask the question, or they do know what I'm getting at, and they're like, this isn't my experience. And they are still faithful Christians. They are still practicing Christians, and they are still engaging and participating with Christianity, but in a way that you might find weird and foreign. And one of the things that does is it brings a continuous reminder to you that Christianity is for everyone, but the way that it's for everyone might not look like you're expecting.
Well, even just hearing you say that about the personal relationship, right? What comes up for me is, well, as autistic people, we have social and relational differences, right? So even
Yep.
when we hear personal relationship with God, it often is situated in this neurotypical frame and definition of relationship. And I can really quickly understand why a lot of autistic people would say, no, I don't have that, right?
Yep.
Um, I would probably argue that there is more relationship than we might say there is, but it just looks different.
I think that's true as well. Like I don't I think a lot of this though, and something I get at a lot in the first 10 episodes of the podcast is that Christianity has a medium through which it communicates. It has an intended target audience, right? It has a group of people that it is trying to speak to. And that group of people is almost never autistic people.
Even as you say that, I'm like, well, Jesus has, as you said, a universal audience. But then, yes, the organized structures, uh, religious leaders within Christianity, there's definitely a target audience, and autistic people fall outside of that. And that's
Yeah.
frustrating, painful, sometimes liberating. It's got a lot of ramifications, I think.
And so like the language that the church uses is often language that just doesn't come to us intuitively.
Right.
And the way that things are articulated in a way that might be intuitive for the general public, but are deeply unintuitive for us. And so you get this translation issue. Like I think the biggest reason, so autistic people are significantly less likely than their non-autistic counterparts to participate in Christianity. And the reasons for that are very complicated. But one of the big reasons, I think, is that the sort of cultural translation work of translating the way that we speak about Christianity into a medium that autistic people will more readily understand just hasn't been done. If you go to your average church, you will hear a sermon that was not intended to be interpreted by an autistic person. You will be given books that are not intended to be interpreted by autistic people.
Yep.
You will get messaging that is not intended to be consumed by an autistic person. And when you add all those things together, you shouldn't be too particularly surprised when autistic people are just less likely to be part of your church body. And so when it comes to questions like a personal relationship, is it that autistic people don't have a personal relationship, or is it just the relational categories that autistic people think in are unique and do not follow along the same lines as a non-autistic relational expression? And I tend to think it's the second one, but like that's something I can't really prove at all. You know,
Sure.
it's a qualitative claim, not a quantitative qu claim, unfortunately. And so I optimistically hope it's true,
Yeah,
but you know, it could just be that it is also possible that autistic people just practice a non-relational form of Christianity.
sure.
When I'm explaining this to non-autistic people, I tell them that autistic people typically practice a non-relational form of Christianity because to be able to explain to them autistic modes of relationality is so difficult that like I will describe it and they will think I'm describing like foreign conceptualizations from an alien population,
Right.
right? And I often have to explain to them that's actually how we hear you as
Right.
as articulating these foreign ideas from an alien population.
We understand the concepts of relationship from a non-autistic point of view because they're all around us and the messaging is prevalent, right? But I want to pause just a second because a lot of our listeners are neurodivergent, not just autistic, but neurodivergent people who are in church still, connected with church life, or have just recently disconnected from church. And I think what you just said a few minutes ago is really powerful that the sermons that are preached are most often not intended to be interpreted by autistic people. The books that are written are often not intended to be read by autistic people. So, for some of you who are listening and are like still wrestling with why it's been so difficult for you, and why you've run into frustration over frustration, or why every Sunday you leave feeling worse than you did when you went in, just offer that as a possibility of what's happening.
So the model that I talk about is what I call the cognitive dissonance pressure cooker. You can sort of imagine your mind like a pressure cooker.
That's not hard for me to imagine. Yes.
Yes. And everyone has like a certain tolerance for pressure that they can handle, and cognitive dissonance increases the pressure.
Oh,
And everyone deals with cognitive dissonance, but autistic people, just on average, have much lower tolerance for cognitive dissonance. Like our pressure vessel just holds less pressure. The opportunities for cognitive dissonance that exist in the church are far more numerous if you are autistic, right? Just we're not even talking about doctrine, not even talking about messaging, just sensory aspects of the church,
yep,
right? Just going into church and experiencing it, being in a autistic body that responds poorly to touch,
yep,
for example, or has sensory processing issues. Like this is going to get you. Verbal processing issues, like especially if you're going to a Protestant church, most of the sermon or most of the church service is just someone talking at you, right? And if you have auditory processing issues,
it's the
that's going to
worst.
cause issues.
Yeah,
Yep. And then there are also emotional processing issues and social processing issues, right? A huge amount of church and the experience of church is built around assumptions that you will be having social experiences, and social experiences mediated through a very specific way of understanding social situations. And so you get all these factors. So you have a less tolerance in your pressure vessel. You have more opportunities for that pressure vessel to go up. And also an important thing to note is that the things that cause cognitive dissonance for autistic people tend to cause significantly more cognitive dissonance. So I've done differential analyses of non-autistic and autistic people, asking questions about like how much do apparent contradictions in the Bible bother you? And for autistic people, it's like 9 out of 10. For a non-autistic person, I don't know, 4 or 5. And basically across the board, the things that bother most people bother autistic people a lot more. And so not only do you have more opportunities, just the pressure itself builds up faster. Churches sort of implicitly understand this, and so they have cognitive dissonance release mechanisms and mechanisms to sort of bring down the pressure in the vessel and help you release the pressure. But these mechanisms are all pretty much always built for a non-autistic person. And so the methods of resolving your cognitive dissonance and the ways that you resolve your cognitive dissonance just don't work for us. When I was going through my deconversion, I remember talking to my pastors and being like, okay, how do you answer my questions? And I can't describe to you how unhelpful they were. Like if anything, they did the opposite of relieve cognitive dissonance and they just caused even more because it isn't just the messaging part that is the reason why we feel so disconnected. It's this just like almost every aspect you can think about or feel about church, it feels like you have to push against it and you have to fight to be in there and to not feel excluded. This isn't a universal experience for all autistics, but it is an extremely common experience for us.
So some of you who are listening, you feel so seen right now, and the way John just articulated that, because I'm actually resonating with that so much. This pressure cooker cognitive dissonance is my real experience and has been my real experience for my whole life. But just recently, I'm starting to actually understand it and not vilify it or shame it as ungodly or unholy, and not look around and go, why does everyone else seem to leave this feeling great when I feel like I've got to isolate for 3 days to just work through this pressure that's on the inside of me, right?
Yeah, one of the most common ways to describe Christianity for autistic people online, if you just like scrape all their comments that they make on forums and things like that, is they describe Christianity as a lifelong and constant struggle. That's one of the most common ways they describe it. And a lot of my podcast is sort of bringing attention to that and being like, look, this is the case. We should probably do something about it if we care about these people.
So let's go there for a minute. In your podcast, you talk about quote unquote autistic Christianity. So, what would you say are some of the distinctives of that expression? You started talking around that, but let's see if we can kind of clarify some of those things from your research.
Yeah, so I classify Christianity or unautistic Christianity as a set of tendencies and a set of tendencies towards and a set of tendencies away.
Okay.
And in one of the episodes, I basically go through these in a lot more detail, and that took me like 3 hours. So I'll try not to do that here and just give you the brief spark notes. So the first characteristic that you will see sort of across autistic Christians is systematizing, just sort of hyper systematizing. This should not be surprising to anyone who has met autistic people or who has looked at the like DSM diagnostic criteria of autism. Autistic people are hyper systematizers. When you talk to an autistic person about Christianity, they have buckets and they have concepts and they put all the things in the buckets and they organize, and they're often quite thorough and rigorous. The second tendency, which is related to that, is intellectualization. So intellectualization is like a way of dealing with things, and like when you're presented with a challenge, how do you deal with that challenge? And the autistic method of dealing with that challenge is to intellectualize it, to treat it like an intellectual problem
Mhm.
and read books about it.
Let me pause you just for
So,
a second
yeah.
on intellectualization. I actually have some theories. Later, I'd love to have a conversation about why I think we do that and uh, how that plays out in life. But yes.
My theory for why we do it is the hammer nail theory, which, if you've heard the phrase, when all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail.
Uh,
Uh, in Christianity, so much of the way that Christianity is talked about to autistic people is very difficult, but one of the few things that we can relate to is the intellectualization part, because the intellectualization part is basically just think about and process information, which is something that autistic people are typically very good at. And so that becomes the tool. And so that when all you have is a hammer, everything is a nail. Intellectualization is the autism hammer within Christianity. And so most problems get solved by trying to hit it with that hammer.
Yeah, and I would say
Yeah.
on the other side, because this is part of my theory, is that because when we go with some of our more free associations or our right brain in the moment sensory responses, it's not always received well. People don't understand
Oh,
it.
yeah. Yeah,
So
it's
like
received incredibly poorly.
so we default to what gets us the most bang for our buck, what we get the
Yep.
most success with, which is intellectualization.
Yep, absolutely. The next characterization is precision. So autistic people are often very precise in their articulations of Christianity to a degree that can be very annoying when you're trying to survey them, because they'll answer no to questions, and the reason they answered no is because you ask them, do you hold to an Orthodox Christianity? And they'll be like, I have slight disagreements with the Council of Chalcedon
Yep.
and how they are and it's like, that's not what I was asking. Okay, back to the drawing board for this question. But yeah, so if it's often very precise and very specific when making claims, and precision often leads them to, in other cases, because they are so precise, they default to not saying anything specific because they don't want to make a mistake.
Right.
And so you'll also have that tendency of precision leading to a sort of apophaticism where where they will not define God, but define what God isn't, because it's easier to be precise in the negative space than it is in the positive space.
Mhm.
And so you find lots of things like that. Another big one is syncretism. So syncretism is a tendency to combine multiple faith traditions together. I find autistic Christians themselves are internally syncretic most of the time, meaning their Christian tradition is made up of all sorts of different Christian traditions that are like mashed together, and unique, bespoke theological beliefs that have only ever been believed by one person once. And it's them. So they're like, a weird mix of non-Chalcedonian Ortho-Lutheranism, or something like that. And and yeah, so I often jokingly call us theological magpies, because we sort of go through the traditions, plucking out the shiny trinkets in their traditions and bringing them over and incorporating them into ours.
So we're going to pause the conversation right there for today, and we'll come back next week with part two of my conversation with John. It was so rich. I'm still chewing on some of the things that he said, and I'd encourage you to reflect on what's been shared today. Where do you find resonance, whether you're autistic or not? Ask some of the autistic people in your life if they resonate. You might even share this podcast with them and see if they resonate with any of these things that John is highlighting as some commonalities. Obviously, again, autism is so heterogeneous. There's no one right way to be autistic, but there are some broad patterns. So you might ask, which ones do you resonate with and which ones do you not? Ask some of the autistic believers in your life or even ex-Christians in your life. Might be an interesting conversation to have. And we'll be back next week with part 2. I can't wait for you to hear. There's so much more goodness, so stay tuned. And don't forget, November 12th, 8 p.m. Eastern United States time. If you're interested in being a part of our live recording, email me. I'd love to connect with you and give you that Zoom link. Thanks for listening to this episode of Neurodivergent Faith. If you like what you heard, consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing this with someone who might need to hear it too. And as you continue to wrestle with faith and identity, remember, your unique brain is a part of God's creative genius. Whether it's the way you process scripture, engage with prayer, or connect with others, you are a reflection of the vast creativity of our Creator. May you trust that God knows you, delights in you, and is working in you exactly as you are. And may you know that you are not walking this journey alone. See you next time.